Good morning, everyone, and welcome to our first World Quality Week celebration of this year. The theme for this year's World Quality Week is sustainability, improving our products, people and planet. And throughout the week, we've got a variety of activities, webinars, resources on our website and elsewhere that I hope that you'll engage with and enjoy. Just a few notices before we begin. First of all, the webinar will be recorded and the recording will be placed in the members area of the CQI website. So you can revisit it, you can share it with your colleagues and continue the professional development and the celebration associated with this week. If you have any questions throughout the presentation, please feel free to post them in the question function, which you should see in your GoToWebinar control panel. And at the end of the webinar, we'll have the opportunity for some discussion with Willy, where I will pose your questions. So please do feel free to keep them coming in. The slides, along with any other documents mentioned throughout, can be accessed via the handout function on your control panel. So please, again, feel free to reference them, download the slides and share them with your colleagues as we go on. It's a great pleasure today to introduce Willy Vandenbrande, who has spoken on a number of occasions for the CQI. Who will today be looking at the why, what and how of environmental sustainability. With no further ado, Willy, over to you.
Oh, thank you very much, Alex. Good day, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you all for joining this webinar and for listening to my presentation. It's a great honor to have been asked to speak for the CQI World Quality Week. And it's also a pleasure addressing you. And as Alex already said, the title is the why, what and how of environmental sustainability. I've talked about sustainability in general on many occasions. Today, the focus will be on environmental sustainability and the state of planet Earth, so to say. Now, let's have a look at the content overview. Obviously, the title already contains a lot. I'll start with the why, the reasons why we should do things about environmental sustainability. The status, where are we at this point in time? The what can we do? And specifically, what can the quality community do and improving the sustainability of our societies and our companies in specific, how they can do that. I'll introduce a methodology that can help you. Who should work on this? And finally, some ideas about the future. What should we work on now? Fundamentally, you could say I will start with a very broad sort of planetary view in the why and the status, bringing it back to action-driven, typically corporate organization sort of actions that can be taken in the what and the how. And at the end, in the who and the future, we'll come back to the more planetary level again. So it's going to be from broad to specified to broad again. Now let's start with the why. And I've come up with three different whys, and the first one is sort of the romantic why. Now you'll be witnessing something rather rare, and that is a consultant not saying anything for about 1 minute and 10 seconds. So I would say enjoy. There you go, and that was probably the hardest part for me, huh? Not speaking as a consultant, but actually the why here, the more or less romantic why, is actually the point that we cannot afford to lose all that natural beauty. And in fact, recently I read a report stating that of all the animal biomass on the planet today, 99% is human and or there for human needs, fundamentally to eat, you know, cattle and all the rest, and some pets. So there is a real risk that we will lose a lot of this natural beauty. And that's one reason why I think it's worthwhile acting on environmental sustainability. The second reason is probably much more used. It's the ecologist reason, where saving the planet might not be needed because the planet has been here long before us and will be here long after us, but we do need to save ourselves through the protection of other species, maintaining functioning ecosystems. The idea behind this, of course, is that everything is intertwined, ecosystems are intertwined, and if they disappear, we human societies also come into danger. A typical example used is the disappearance of flying insects in general and bees in particular, which could be a threat to food production. This is a reason that I have been using a lot in the past. I'm not 100% sure if it is really still true. We tend to be very resourceful and we're very good in coming up with technical solutions. So maybe we can develop a society where we can survive as our species, Homo sapiens sapiens, without any others. But it's not the kind of world I would want to live in. So it's a valid reason, both from a romantic and an ecologist point of view. And the last one is the more economical view. And it's written here maybe a little bit in a cynical way, but we need to save the planet, protect other species, all ecosystems, if this generates more money than destroying them. Now, as I said, it may sound a bit cynical. On the other hand, it does have a strong power. And if you look at, for instance, global warming and the exhaust of greenhouse gases, of course, if it becomes more expensive to send out greenhouse gases in the environment than not to, there will be a big pressure not to. So although it seems cynical, it could be a very important driving force, this economical view on how to move in order to work on environmental sustainability. But I'll come back to that throughout the rest of the presentation. So fundamentally, these are three possibilities, three reasons why people might say we need to do something. And probably the three of them might as well be intertwined as well. People may be forced to do things because of all three of them. But before that, the question may be asked, is it really needed? Is the situation such that we actually need to do something? Now, the best way to get an overview of the current sustainability status will be the SDGs, the Sustainable Development Goals by the United Nations. And one of the organizations I will mention later on as well is the UN Sustainable Development Solutions Network. And every year they bring out a report with the state of affairs on the SDGs. And the 2020 status is a very important one because, of course, it is 1/3 of the way. So for those who are not that familiar, the Sustainable Development Goals are 17 goals. They started off in 2015 as a follow-up of the Millennial Goals, and we're now 1/3 of the way. What is very interesting, I think, for all of you, is the fact that all of these data can all be found. It's all open source. You can download the full report. You can download all the data used to set up the report. So that's really very good. And what's the current status after 5 years? Well, this is sort of the evolution of the average of all 17, averaged over all countries. And what you see is that as of 2015, it's been rising to 2019, and then for the first time dropping in 2020, which of course is directly related to the COVID crisis, the coronavirus. Overall, from 2015 to 2020, you see an increase of about 1.5 percentage points. Now, this looks like quite a nice steep curve, but of course you have to be very careful. Many years ago, I attended a presentation that was titled "How to Lie with Graphics." It wasn't actually lying with graphics. It was presenting the correct data, but in such a way that it gave a certain impression. This gives the impression of quite a nice increasing curve. This is what you get if you plot these data points on a 0 to 100 scale in percents, and that looks quite different. So although we have improved, it's going slowly, too slowly. If we need to get 100% by 2030, we still have a very long way to go. So that's one issue that we see. Overall, sustainability is not going fast enough. But overall, sustainability is, of course, a combination of the classical triple P, people, planet, profit, and it's not necessarily equally divided. And if you take the 1.5 percentage point average that I noted here, you will see that some things are above average, like no poverty, which is obviously a very good thing, gender equality. The biggest one scoring well is industry, innovation, and infrastructure. But if you look at the things that are critical for the environment, and I added 4 here, but fundamentally you could say these 3 are the most specific for environmental sustainability. Climate action, hardly any improvement. Life below water, hardly any improvement. Life on land, getting worse. So fundamentally, you could say that on the one hand, we're not improving fast enough. And in addition to that, the planetary indicators are even a lot worse off. And there's something I just used, the triple P model by John Elkington. There's something that I've noticed not many people know, but John Elkington recently recalled his triple P model, and that was in 2018, because he found it was misused. And he said, we talk about people, planet, profit, but in practice, profit is always put first. And you could almost say we're not talking about profit, but about profiteering at the expense of people and planet. So I have to recall my model, which is a very, very bad sign. So indicating that things need to change. Now, what the SDSN also does is make a ranking of what we could call sustainable countries. And this is the top 20. And classically, you see the Nordic countries leading. Belgium, my country, is actually doing very well. It's on 5th place. And basically what you can say is the countries on top are generally rich countries, the OECD and EU countries. United Kingdom is on here. Of course, for some time that was also an EU country, but not anymore. And these are the countries that do well on the overall ranking. However, there's something that we need to think about carefully, because one way of doing well, let's look again at greenhouse gas exhausts. If you stop producing steel, if you stop producing cement, if you get a lot of your industry outside, of course, your exhausts will be quite low, but the exhausts in other places will be not that good. And in order to look at that sort of aspect of sustainability, you know, like exporting your problems, they also make a spillover index ranking, and the spillover is the effect you have on other countries' SDGs. And if you look at the spillover ranking, these are the rankings of these top SDG countries. And as you can see, all of them are actually doing very badly on spillover. So we tend to export our sustainability problems, and that gives already a different view. Switzerland, for instance, being 16th here of 165 countries ranked, they're the 161st, so really very bad. But it's true for all of these countries. So that's a little bit of a problem. And actually, interestingly, the top 20 all score red on climate action. And scoring red means major challenges remain. Now, this is UN language, so it needs to be a little bit kind, but major challenges remain is something like we're not even close to our own target. And if you look at that for climate action, if you look at that for life below water, if you look at that for life on land, of course, you see, I think, our two major environmental problems: global warming and loss of biodiversity. So that is a serious problem that is hitting all of us. Okay. So it's clear that we need to do something. The status is such that action is very urgently needed. And one way of acting is through quality. And that's the second part of this presentation that I will focus on now. What do we need to do? There's no lack of systems. There's no lack of organizations. Some people will be familiar with B Corp certification. That's rather popular, I think, in the US and Canada, I've heard. There's also an office now in Amsterdam promoting it within Europe. There's the UN Global Compact, which is a unit typically for industry, for corporations. There's the UN Sustainable Development Solutions Network, and the word solutions is in red for a reason here, because this is important. It's towards solutions, towards actions. There are science-based climate targets, so that an organization can put itself online with the overall Paris Climate Agreement targets that were made there. So there are plenty of organizations. There are plenty of conferences. There's a lot of attention to sustainability. Basically, if you want to, you can attend at least 3 webinars every day, I think, on the sustainability. So there's an awful lot of words, you know. I'm actually adding to them at the moment, but unfortunately, clearly this is not enough. There's an awful lot of words on global warming. However, CO2 exhausts have continued to rise. So there's an awful lot of talk on biodiversity. However, species continue to disappear. So we're clearly not there yet, and the words have not been turned into actions. And basically, in the next part of the presentation, I want to show how quality can add to actions going in the right direction. You know, I talked about the climate agreement, December 2015. I mean, that's almost 6 years ago. The main target discussed a lot today, the 1.5 degrees Celsius warming. Most climate scientists think this is already no longer achievable. So really, we haven't done very well in that area. One of the problems I see is that whatever actions are going on, and I showed you the organizations already previously, or some of them, much of that is related to large corporations, and many of the actions are taken by large corporations. So we lose part of the industry. There's another problem, and that's seriousness, greenwashing, as is often said. Also, you know, there are mission, vision, values, and yet we had Dieselgate. And Volkswagen has all these things, mission, visions, and values, and honesty is in there, and care for the environment is in there. I have to say, to their defense, they're now massively investing into electric vehicles, so they seem to have learned a lesson somehow from that. But basically, you could say there are two problems. There's the sincerity problem. There's the general action problem, but very specifically a large group of small and medium-sized enterprises that's not sufficiently reached, where the actions are not yet starting. And why would that be? And why is that? Well, I've found here a couple of reasons in a sort of a small analysis. I think, first of all, there's still a lack of understanding by many organizations of what sustainability really is. And for instance, the fact that, you know, triple P, people, planet, profit, that profit is not a bad word within sustainability. Profiteering is another thing. You know, profit at the expense of people and planet, that's not what we want, but we do want financial sustainability. So there's a lack of understanding, that's one. The second thing, and I think this is something that probably hits all of us also as individuals, not just as people working in corporations, that's the mountain you see in front of you. Too big a task, too small the impact. What can I do about that? And actually the sustainable development goals as such, if you just look at the highest level of them, you know, one of them is zero hunger. So you're here with this small organization of 10 people, and you sit together and you say, okay, let's do something about SDG 2, zero hunger. Well, you know, it's not going to be easy to solve that. So it looks as if it's an impossible task. I think people sometimes get, yeah, how would I put it? Get disillusioned because of that. Yeah. Third reason, yet another thing we have to do, and related to that is cost. Related to that is cost. Because, you know, think about smaller organizations. We already have to do ISO, we have safety, we have risk, we have so many things we need to do. We have a lot of legal requirements. We don't have the resources to do all that. There was a study by the University of Antwerp not that long ago, actually asking people about working on the SDGs. And this came out as the biggest thing withholding them from taking action on the SDGs. And I think one of the things we need to change is our language. And if we talk about sustainability, we have to stop talking about cost. We need to start talking about investments. I'll come back to that later, but words do matter. And I think, you know, we used to have systems like cost of quality. That's a rotten term. We should never talk about the cost of quality, and we should never talk about the cost of sustainability either. And then lastly, too complex solutions or proposed actions, because of course they are coming from large corporations, they're coming from the academic world, and they tend to be extremely good but hard to grasp for smaller organizations. I mentioned the science-based climate targets, which is a fantastic system, no doubt about it, but very hard to tackle for smaller organizations. Now, of course, stating the reasons almost immediately leads to giving the solutions. If there's lack of understanding, there's an education and explaining necessary, what is sustainability, and focusing on this financial sustainability. If it's too big a task, too small the impact, focus on strength in numbers, which is still not always easy. It's difficult to do that, but even torrential rain consists of individual drops. There's been a tendency many years ago to shift the responsibility from governments and corporations to individuals. If everyone does a little bit change to his lifestyle, that'll solve the problem. That is not true. But today, there's a shift the other way around. Well, it's not what we do. It'll have to come from governments and corporations. And that's not 100% true either. I think all of us can play a role in this. And even small things we do make a difference. Because in fact, there's an awful lot of us on this planet. If there are 8 billion people on the planet, saving a little bit by everyone is still a large amount. So it's important to keep that in mind. We cannot boil the ocean, but with all of us together, we can maybe try to boil a part of it. Yet another thing we have to do, that's this cost issue. As I said, we need to see it as investment, but one thing that is vital for smaller organizations is, no, you cannot afford a sustainability officer or a sustainability department. However, and that's where quality comes in, you can integrate a lot of this within what you're doing today in quality management activities. And I'll expand on that in the next part of the presentation. And then finally, as too complex solutions or proposed actions, the KISS ME principle, keep it super simple, make it easy. Look at action-based and adapt it to the means and current state of the organization. And if you look at this, there are actually at an organizational level some things that we need to focus on. And the first one is that reducing environmental impact always increases profits. This is where my statement of a couple of minutes ago, don't talk about cost, talk about investment. Anything you invest in reducing environmental impact will automatically increase profits today. And just as some examples, projects that lead to less water consumption, less CO2 exhaust, less landfill, less raw material use, less energy use, all of these things immediately bring profit. And actually many of the quality improvement projects that we do have some of these things as consequences. Now today, thinking about Six Sigma projects, for instance, we probably do them from a financial sustainability point of view, getting more out of the already invested capital and eliminating waste, thinking in lean terms. But actually, all of this is contributing to a higher sustainability of your organization. Now, this immediately brings money today, but it will lead to much bigger avoided costs tomorrow, because all of the things in here will be much more expensive tomorrow than they are today. And the price increase of these things will be much bigger than the inflation rate. And why is quality well placed? Because in fact, this battle of putting one thing against another, in our case, quality against profitability, for instance, or quality against productivity, we have done this. And this is the same battle. We need to make clear that sustainability and profitability go together, that it's a false contradiction. So we have fought that battle, and as an organization, as a department, we are present everywhere, so we're best placed to report, communicate, and facilitate sustainability. We can do a lot there because we are already doing things there, and we can fall back on our experience on how to introduce quality into an organization. And actually, sustainability is almost exactly the same thing, the same way of implementing. And in order to help organizations, I've developed a methodology called AAA, and it will look at the present that you can improve, improving current offerings and processes with the things that we're already doing, as I was saying, and it will allow you to look at creating the future. And I think that these two aspects are possible for quality, where the first one is already done today very often through quality projects. It's about improvement. If it's about improvement, it's about quality. The second thing I think we need to focus even more on. 80% of everything is determined in design. That's also 80% of sustainability. And quality needs to be much more present in design. And in the case of sustainability, actually, you can generate new offerings that are much more sustainable than the current offerings. But for that, you need to focus on design, on developing new processes, on developing new products. Okay. And as I said, the AAA model can help you with that. What the AAA model does, it gives you a status from awareness to adoption to achievement, and it will link that, in the next slide you will see that, it'll link that to the three aspects of sustainability and corresponding quality tools. Now, if you look at the status, this is actually the road that quality has been walking. In awareness, it's removing a false contradiction between sustainability and profitability, just like we had to do with quality. In adoption, it's expanding. Okay, your first applications will typically be in the operations, but of course you need to expand that to the entire flow of your product, to the entire value chain, and that's where it becomes strategical, where you incorporate design, development, new products. And finally, in achievement, it becomes holistic, and this is where you incorporate society as a whole within your view on quality, which is automatically a view on sustainability. So if you look at that, you have these three statuses, and you see that you can start with awareness through the operational sustainability. And make no mistake, especially in small organizations, you need to focus on this financial sustainability. Small companies, they need to keep on generating money to keep on existing. There's no other way. But by starting to reduce harm, by working on improvement projects, by using the quality tools that are designed to do just that, you can already get an organization into working on sustainability, and specifically into seeing how sustainability is adding to profitability. In a next step, you will have environmental sustainability as the driving force, and the focus will be on reducing harm. This is what you do here, reducing harm. In a holistic approach, you will look at improving the global ecosystem. You could say we go from reducing harm to doing good. Now, as an example for that, looking at, for instance, automotive industry, you could say, what I do here is I start reducing fuel consumption, which is something that many car companies have been doing. All of them have been doing that over the years, so that we reduce fuel consumption. In a next step, you could say we'll replace fossil fuel cars by electric, hydrogen, maybe some other possibilities driven cars. And in a achievement status, in a holistic approach, we could look at, maybe we can develop a car that while driving removes CO2. which means doing good. Now, a few comments to that. So this is a nice example. However, we can do even better if we think of societal quality. For instance, typically in cities, for instance, the solution is not replacing every fossil fuel car by an electric or hydrogen car, because in that case, you will still have your traffic jam problem. It would be much better to replace fossil fuel cars by electric bikes. Looking at other SDGs, that would be very interesting, actually, and have less cars. And if you have less cars, that will make cities more livable. So you can do even much more than just this if you think wide enough, if you think broad enough. Now, this brings me to the who and who should do that. Of course, all of us are involved here, as I already mentioned. It are not just governments, it are not just corporations, it are not just citizens, it's all of them working together. But of course, when I see the who, I obviously think of these guys. The Who, they had a record called My Generation, and actually, yes, they are of my generation. I'm afraid I have to say that today, and maybe of the generation of some of the attendees here. And I use this because this generational thing is very important in our current definition of sustainability. And this is the current general definition. As said, I'm expanding again from the corporate level to the overall level. We define it now as sustainable development is development that meets the needs of the present generation without compromising the ability of future generations to meet their own needs. So you see that generations are clearly in there. However, I think this definition in itself poses a problem, because the definition talks about the needs of the present generation of people and compromising the ability of future generations to meet their own needs of people. So it's very much focused on what we need. It is more or less seeing the planet as being there to satisfy our needs. And I don't think we can still afford this. And there's another issue to this. A farmer in Brazil burning down a part of the rainforest does that in order to meet his needs and the needs of his family, and to have land in order to make sure that his kids and the kids of his kids will be able to meet their own needs. Yeah. Now, I talked about the economic aspect of why, and I think if it is more interesting for this farmer to burn down the rainforest than to not burn it down, it will be burned down. And actually, basically, he could even point at this list of top countries, all these rich countries that you have on the SDG list, and basically say, well, actually, what I'm doing is exactly what you have been doing for ages. And that is true, of course. In Europe, there used to be a pristine forest. There's hardly anything left of it, just a little bit in Poland and a little bit, I think, in Slovakia. The rest has been burned down or has been cut down. So if we want the rainforest to be saved, we will have to make sure that saving the rainforest gives that farmer a better future than destroying it. And it gives us a lot of responsibility to the rich countries that I don't think we pick up yet today. And because I don't think it's right to see the planet as there to provide for our needs, I have an alternative where sustainability means that the present generation takes the necessary actions to pass on our unique ecosystem to the next generation than it was received, and so on. And looking at the future, and building on these thoughts, we have to accept that today we do live in the Anthropocene. We humans are defining how the planet looks. We have that power today. Okay, now some people may say, well, finally we are where we belong. We're on the throne, but being on the throne obviously means we have some responsibilities. And one of the first things we need to understand is that we're all citizens of planet Earth. And if we have problems in getting these global agreements, it's probably because the people sitting there and negotiating are not sitting there first and foremost as citizens of planet Earth, but first and foremost as representatives of 200 and something countries. And we need to be able to think above that, because otherwise we will stay in trouble and we will not progress fast enough. We need to transcend nationalities. Actually, most of the studies we do of biosphere, cryosphere, and what have you are done now by satellites. If you look at these satellites images, you will not see boundaries. And we need to understand that we're all citizens of planet Earth. And that means that we need to think about a sustainable lifestyle. Now, what would a sustainable lifestyle be? A sustainable lifestyle would be one that can go on forever, because that's what sustainable means, and that is attainable for everyone on this planet. So if we are with 8 to 10 billion, which is sort of where it will balance out, all of them should be able to access a sustainable lifestyle. And if all of them have that lifestyle, the planet can provide for it until eternity, or you could say it can be done in a balanced way with all ecosystems until eternity. That's why personally I think societal quality is important, but we have to go beyond that, thinking about overall environmental quality for all species. And I think also that the time to act was yesterday. That shouldn't withhold us to start now, but I have to say we have lost time. And I'll end with one of my all-time favorites, and that's David Bowie, who wrote the song 5 Years. And the 5 Year song of David Bowie was one about that the planet still has 5 years and then it'll all come to an end. I've changed the lyrics a little bit, looking back to the past 5 years, and this is what I've come up with. We've lost 5 years. We just let it pass. 5 years we said on our, we've lost 5 years, species are gone. 5 years, that's what we've done, or that's all we've done. And I don't think we can afford another 5 years before taking real action that is really changing things. And with that, I want to thank you very much for your kind attention. You have some contact details here. Quality of whole life, I made a poster of that some time ago. So if anybody is interested, you can ask that. I'll be glad to send it through to you. And with that, I want to pass it on to Alex, who will run the questions. And he is.
Thank you very much, Willy. Really appreciate that. That was a very powerful and evocative presentation. I always appreciate any reference, not just the Who, but David Bowie as well. So particularly enjoyed that. And you really spoilt us. You know, over a minute of silence in a presentation from a consultant was very refreshing. But thank you. There was some really standout comments in there, a couple of which I'd like to pull out. If I may. I think you know what you said about never talking about the cost of quality. Neither should we ever talk about the cost of sustainability. It's about investment. I think this is a really powerful message, and I think you know it's something that as a profession we sometimes struggle with. We often talk about the costs associated and you know the implications of when things go wrong. without necessarily talking about the value that that the profession and what we do can add. And this certainly is going to be an area of work that the CQI will be looking at in the not too distant future. And this idea that sustainability, quality, and profit go hand in hand, and that we shouldn't fear profit as a dirty word, if you like. It is inevitably a driver for many organisations, many people, and appreciating that doing the right thing can also go hand in hand with increasing profits, and the fiscal sustainability of the organisation, I think, is really good. And also your point about reporting, communicating, and facilitating. This is what the quality professional already does for governance assurance improvement. So why not sustainability also? And what you've described here, and what we're going to look at in more detail, particularly in Friday's webinar, is where we see that green thread, if you like, of sustainability going through the actions and activities of the quality professional already. So I think there's some really good food for thought in there, and I hope that everyone here will take some of that away. We have a number of questions in, as well as some of my own thoughts. We'll try and get through them. If we don't manage to touch on everything, then we'll follow up in writing and post the questions on the CQI website. But let's see how we get on in the next 10-15 minutes. Something that's come up is, you talked about the importance of change, of innovation, and designing and building for the future. And I think, looking at some of the messages that have been coming from COP26 over the last few days, this idea of innovation and exploiting technology and new ideas is crucial to addressing the challenges facing our planet. But how would you respond to the challenge that this isn't necessarily the role of the quality professional, that this is drawing the quality profession into something that it's not there to do? One could argue that quality is about ensuring that the needs and expectations of your interested parties are met, but not in redesigning the future. There are other people who do that.
Redesigning the future. Of course, we're not going to develop, I don't know, carbon storage technologies and that sort of thing, but we can promote it within organizations. For instance, let's think about something basic. Most people use some sort of risk analysis when developing new products. There's no reason why you wouldn't add the environmental sustainability implications as a key element to discuss while discussing risk of innovations that you're thinking of. That's of course not at the global scale, but of course all of us, I think in many organizations, whether it's service or production, we're developing new things, new solutions. We want to serve our customers better. There's no reason why we wouldn't look at, with every even small thing that we want to change or implement, that we always take care of the sustainability impacts of that. So again, it wouldn't be like as if quality would do that, but it would be quality that would tell people, never forget to add in your risk analysis sustainability risks, or take it up in a procedure on risk analysis for new products, as at one line must always be, at least one line must always be sustainability risks. I know that it's tricky. I gave a presentation last week for an ASQ division, and there I talked about helping people, and someone also said, is that not the task of human resources? Also other people. And yes, but I think, when I said report, communicate, facilitate. I think these things are our task, not just for us, for all line managers as well, but we can be a catalyst in these things without having necessarily to do it ourselves.
And I think that those are aspects that we look at in some detail in the CQI competence framework, and the role of the quality professional in doing so. And I dread to see the words sustainability-based thinking crop up in ISO 9001, 9004 at all. But that approach, that mindset, I think is very powerful, and we've seen it with risk. Risk-based thinking is absolutely at the core of what we do, and is reflected in those standards in the CQI's frameworks also. So thank you. That was really interesting. We've got a couple of questions that may drift into the world of public policy a bit. And I don't assume you to answer from the perspective of a lobbyist or politician, but the opportunity to replace cars powered by fossil fuels with electric cars is one that is hotly debated at the moment. Those of you who are based in the UK might have seen some interesting debate on BBC Question Time the other day on this very issue. But how realistic is it to replace cars with bikes, with public transport? How do we go about encouraging the use of public transport systems?
Well, I think how realistic is it? I think there are a couple of good examples. I think of Copenhagen, Oslo, as cities, and as more and more people are going to live in cities, that's going to have a bigger impact. It's realistic if it is accessible, if it is good service, if it's offering value to customers, to users. As of this year, I think already last year, but I'm not 100% sure, Luxembourg, for instance, has made all public transport free, actually, in order to promote that. Now, I'm not saying it has to be free, but it has to offer a valid alternative, and it can work. Especially the bikes as an example. I'm always thinking that there used to be this song, there are 9 million bicycles in Beijing, and then they've all been replaced by cars. But I think the future of Beijing will be by replacing the cars again by much more bicycles, because it'll make it a lot more livable. So you see, replacing every fuel car by an electric car is not the ideal solution in my view, because then you will get problems with having the batteries and raw materials for the batteries, etc., etc. I think less cars. It's also a car company now produces cars, but really they should offer mobility solutions. Now, cars can be one of those things, can be part of that mobility solution, but it's not necessarily the only one. It's also a bit the thinking of replacing products by services, where you would say that let's because what people want is to move from place A to place B, and a car is probably the least efficient way of doing that. It's about, it weighs 2 tons. Transports 80 kilo person, so it's really not, and most of the time it's not doing anything, it's just standing there. If you would have it like that in your manufacturing environment, you'd kick it out immediately.
So, I remember last year we discussed if you were to do a Lean Six Sigma project on transport, one of the first things that you cut out would be the car parks in every driveway. It's a thing.
Actually, Luxembourg is a good example of that, because and that's already several years, they do not allow any open space to be taken up by car parks.
Right.
So if you want to add car parks, you need to build in height. Also as a company, you are not allowed to, because they want to reduce the amount of surface that's all covered in concrete. So that's an interesting thing.
Interesting. Yeah. And again, this might drift into the world of international politics a little bit too much. But is there a risk that there's a bit of, I suppose, unconscious bias in some of this conversation, where the kind of solutions that we've been talking about, aside from the role and activities of the quality professional, are much easier to address if you happen to be a wealthy, well-developed country.
Yes. Yes, for sure. I think we still see that the whole debate is still very much run by wealthy countries. That's why showing the SDG ranking, I also showed the spillover index, to show that not only we have a large historic guilt, that's also true, but Belgium in that ranking was 5th. I can tell you, if every citizen on this planet would live the way the average Belgian does, we'd probably need 4 or 5 planets, and we only have one. So until Musk and his colleagues have turned Mars into paradise, it's going to be this one planet that'll have to do that. That's why I mentioned at the end this sustainable lifestyle. That's a lifestyle multiplied by 9 billion is sustainable. And that'll require some transferring.
And I really think that emphasizes how there is no silver bullet for this. There is no single solution that fits everything, which I know sounds like an obvious thing to say, but we can't assume that we're working towards that one solution that's going to fix it.
Well, this is a complex problem, Alex, and complex problems never have just one solution. That's it. And actually, there's often a drive to come up with a one solution, and that's stopping people of doing anything. That's not really very good. We have to understand that every action is a contribution and helps.
I mean, we're probably quite lucky here, because my next question was basically to ask you what the silver bullet was, but I'm conscious that we've just got a couple of minutes left, and there are a couple of other things that I'd like to say, but as a bit of food for thought, some contemplation about what the key drivers are going to be. The moral case has been made, the evidence has been presented, as you showed at the beginning of your presentation. The activists are on the street, and they're even more prominent online. There's international cooperation, there are statements of intent, and drawing that link between sustainability and profit. I think one of the things for us all to think about is whether this is a sufficient force for change. What's the role of regulation, of financial penalties or incentives in here?
I think
moralizing.
If you look at global warming as one thing where the COP is now on, I think probably carbon taxing will be one of the things that could make a change. Make it more expensive to exhaust than not to exhaust. That sort of a thing. I think one thing we mustn't forget either is that if you look at that CO2 exhaust, then over the last 30 years, there's been 2 years when they came down. That's what's 2010 and 2020, which were both major economic crises. Now that's not a coincidence, so that should make us think about the overall sustainability of the economic system as such. This unlimited growth, I think we will need to rethink that. That's obviously going very, very systemic, but still I think these data show us that there's something fundamentally wrong there.
Absolutely. As always, Willy, I could stay and talk about this for another half hour, half day, probably half the week. But I know that people have other things to get back to. A couple of things that I would like to say before we round off. First of all, thank you very much for your time, for your expertise, and for contributing to CQI's World Quality Week in this way. I hope that everyone who's attended today has benefited from it, has learned something, and has some thoughts to take away with them. I'm sorry we haven't got through all the questions, but it's a very thought-provoking area. We will do our best to respond to those questions online. I think one thing that I'd like to say is around what happens next, if you like. The case of urgency has been made, the data's there. Willy's described how there's no lack of systems. There's an awful lot of chat, and this is a very important element to this year's World Quality Week activity. You're being challenged to turn those words into action. How can you, as quality professionals, affect change in your organisations, in your businesses, and in the built and natural environment in which you exist? And how are you and your organisations going to start designing sustainability into your processes, into your products, and ultimately into the planet? Just to reiterate that the webinar will be available in the members area of the CQI website, so please do take time to go back to it and reflect on what you've learned today, and make sure that you include that in your CPD, in your professional development plan, as I'm sure there are many things that you could learn from this today. We have a further 2 webinars coming up this week. We're very pleased to have Dr. Greg Watson with us on Wednesday, discussing how quality actions can enable the move to a habitable environment. That's Wednesday at 11 AM GMT, and on Friday at 2 PM GMT, we're talking about sustainability in context of the CQI quality competence framework, and looking at that green thread that I described earlier that goes through it. And that's in partnership with our friends at Catalyst. Our branches and special interest groups are also running multiple events, multiple webinars across the week. So have a look on the CQI events calendar and sign up to those that you'd like to attend. And ultimately, it's my pleasure to announce the International Quality Awards 2022 will be taking place on the 23rd of June next year. For more information, check out the website. And finally, my thanks again to Willy. I really appreciate your time, your insights, and your conversation. And thank you, everyone, for joining us today. And I hope you have a productive, thought-provoking World Quality Week that leads to action and change. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Alex. Thank you, everyone. Bye.